Hello and welcome back to Passing the Torch, an online Bible study with your host and teacher Bob Clark. Yeah, that's me. Today is Lesson 13 of Study 1 of a series of 8 studies, got all that we're calling a Mosaic of Bible Prophecy. So this first study that we've been going through for quite a while now is an introduction to and summary of Bible prophecy. And we finally reached that point where we're going to go into a summary of Bible prophecy, starting with this lesson for the next 3. And today's lesson, Lesson 13, is a review or an overview of traditional pre-tribulation rapture scenario. So it's not just talking about the rapture, but that overall, the from the perspective of pre-tribulation rapture is really what I mean. All right. So we've, in these set of lessons, we've went through an introduction, we've laid a lot of background, we've talked about key timelines, so we're talking about a summary of Bible prophecies. So what to expect today? We'll start off with a summary of end times Bible prophecy. This is just an overview and introduction, sort of. And then a very brief summary of the traditional view. And then we're going to go into an approximate prophetic timeline speculation. And then we'll sum it all up at the end. So what are we doing here? Between this lesson and the next 2, we're going to be presenting end-time Bible prophecy from 3 different perspectives. So this first one in this lesson is what you would call sort of a traditional pre-trib or pre-tribulational rapture view of end-time Bible prophecy. Next time we're going to get over into not dig to the same depth, but we're going to get over into a little bit of Islamic eschatology or end times Bible prophecy, and how does that relate to what we believe as Christians. And in that third lesson from now, we'll be talking about an untraditional speculation of a possible pre-tribulation rapture or a rapture scenario. And so again, all of this is end time Bible prophecy. So we're going to give you several different perspectives on this, all of which will still tie in with what the Bible says. The timing on a lot of the things we present today and in that third lesson on the untraditional speculation, a lot of the timing is going to be speculation, except for historical events or where the Bible is explicit in timing. So in some of these cases, we'll give you a range of, it could happen here, okay? In these set of lessons, we're not going to be presenting a lot of Bible references because we're trying to do a top-level brief summary to get you used to understanding the language. So we're trying to do this presented in a simplified fashion using plain language because we know that in these, so I said this is the first of 8 studies, every study having lots of lessons. We know that we're going to dig very deep into the Bible references in the later studies. So this is just an overview. And you have to understand, I'll go ahead and tell you this too. There are thousands, if not millions, perspectives on end-time Bible prophecy and what it means and timing and such as that. So I'm giving you sort of a semi-consensus of some of these things in this lesson. That doesn't mean that it's right. Otherwise, I wouldn't be presenting the untraditional speculation later. That means this is what most Bible teachers, it's sort of what they teach. There may be variations on that. So we're going to start digging into this timeline now. And again, there's a lot of speculation here, but this is what is typically taught. No, I'm not expecting you to read this very, very fine print, but it's not going to be too much better than that. So we'll go through it and see what we wind up with here. So we're going to go through it, and I'm going to do my best to help explain as we go along here. Right, so at the top, the timeline that you're looking at, it has 32 AD, so that's when Jesus was resurrected, to 1947 AD. Then there is 1948. Then there is 1949 to 1955. There's 1956, 1967, 1968 to 1972, 1973. We have 1974 to 2022. Then there's 2023, 2024. And I'll go ahead and let you know, these charts were made in 2023 and 2024, even though I'm teaching them now in 2025. And then I have an unknown time, and at some point in here there's the church rapture, and then there's another unknown length of time, and then you have the 7 years of the tribulation. So let's start going through each row here, and later versions of this timeline, we're going to truncate it to just the last part of this. So the first thing, in the first row of this timeline, we have the fig tree. So if you remember, we've talked about it in the previous lesson, about Jesus said that the generation that saw the fig tree start to have leaves, that generation would see all of these things fulfilled. Well, what generation is that? We've talked about this in a previous lesson, I think in the last lesson actually. Is it May 14th of 1948, which is the reestablishment of the nation of Israel? Or was it maybe June 7th of 1967, when the Jewish people, during the 7-Day War, they regained the old city of Jerusalem? Or is it some future major event in Israel? The next line is the rapture of the church. All right? So what is the rapture of the church? It's an event when the true believers in Christ will be removed from the earth and taken directly to heaven in a moment of time without warning. It is accompanied by the resurrection of the bodies of those who have already died. So when will this rapture of the church occur? Lots of debate on this. There are people that say it's pre-tribulational, that are mid-tribulational, it is pre-wrath, it is post-tribulational. That is it at the beginning? Is it before the tribulation? Is it at the beginning? Is it the mid? Is it at the end? A lot of debate over that. So our beliefs in this study is that it will be before the tribulation. That is pre-tribulational. Then we have also this thing of the Psalm 83 war. That's if you look at Psalm 83, it refers to an attack by the nations immediately surrounding Israel in an effort to annihilate Israel as a nation and a people. So has this already occurred? It might include the previous wars. So as soon as Israel declared independence on May 14th, they were attacked by Egypt and Jordan and Syria. They were attacked again in 1956. 1967 was the 7-Day War, and 1973 was the Yom Kippur War. So those may be all that the Psalm 83 war was talking about. Or maybe that is actually that it includes another war in the future. So what all of that is included in Psalm 83 war? Why am I pointing this out? Because there are things that we know absolutely, and there are things that we assume or speculate on, but we can't really know for sure at this point. At some point, we may know for sure. All right? We would likely will at some point. So then you have, at some point in here, you have the war or the battle of Gog and Magog. And that's found in Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's sometimes called the Ezekiel 38-39 war. So what is that? That is an attack on Israel by a confederacy of nations, including Russia, Iran, Turkey, Sudan, and Libya. It is led by a king that the Bible refers to as Gog, and he's over the land of Magog. And there's pretty good evidence that this land of Magog that is referring to is actually Russia. That's why we say that. The purpose of this war, this short-lived war, is to take booty from the land of Israel, is to not to annihilate Israel, but is to get whatever wealth they can from Israel. Now, unlike a lot of nations in the Middle East that are full of oil and such as that, Israel up to this point has not found all of those kind of reserves and such. There are some things there, but we'll have to see what's going to happen with that. However, we know that God divinely steps in to destroy these attacking armies and to save Israel. So when is this going to happen? Is it going to be before the rapture? Is it going to be between the rapture and the tribulation? Is it going to be after the start of the tribulation? These are things, the actual timing of that is not pinpointed. And another thing to note is some people debate as to whether the Battle of Gog and Magog is the same as the Battle of Armageddon. Some people say that it is the same, but if you go and look, you can see that though the language has some similarities, there are a lot of distinctions that separate these two as two different battles. So let's look at the next set of pieces here. We have the rise. Okay, so note that at the top of the timeline, I've gotten rid of everything before 1920, or excuse me, before 2024. So we're just looking from 2024 to the 1,000-year millennium reign. Okay, we'll explain that here in a moment. So sometime between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation, we have the rise of the Antichrist and the false prophet. Why do we know? So this is one of those that we know the rise of the Antichrist does not happen before the rapture of the church. We know that from the book of Thessalonians. He will not be revealed until the rapture. So who is the Antichrist? He is a political leader who will arise after the rapture and be adopted as the Jewish Messiah before he turns on and tries to destroy and annihilate the Jewish people. So a lot of debate among Bible teachers as to whether the kingdom of the Antichrist, is that a one-world government, as a lot of people say, or is it more of a local government, a local kingdom? Well, who is the false prophet? The false prophet will be a religious leader who arises and points to the Antichrist as being the true Messiah. Okay, and we'll go into a lot of other details about these guys later when we get into the later studies. So we know that there's going to be the confirmation, what actually starts the 7-year tribulation. The Antichrist is going to confirm a covenant, and it says, with many, for a period of 7 years. That'll mark the beginning of Daniel's 70th week, or what we call the 7-year tribulation. So some people say that the rapture is what marks the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, but Daniel does not say that. It says that it is this confirmation of a covenant. All right. So next you have the 7-year tribulation, also known as Daniel's 70th week or 70th 7-year period. And there are numerous prophetic scriptures that describe this time of the 7 years, the last 3.5 of which are called the Great Tribulation. And during this time, there's increasingly severe judgments that come upon the earth. All right, so the Bible does not call the full 7-year period the tribulation. We let me get my words straight here. We extrapolate that from the last 3.5 year period, which Jesus called the Great Tribulation. So we've sort of stretched it to the whole thing as tribulation because it appears that the judgments on the earth are becoming increasingly severe. Then we know that the temple will be rebuilt sometime during this end time eschatological era. Okay? When is it actually going to happen? We're not sure. But we know that from Jesus and from Paul and from John that the Jewish temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt sometime before the middle of the 7-year tribulation. So that's the latest that it can be. Well, when does it start? Does it start? And if you're looking at the chart, I have the arrow that starts sort of at the church rapture. It can start before the church rapture. It could be between the rapture and the 7 years. It could be during that first 3.5 years of the 7-year period. We're not exactly sure, but we know that it has to be established by the time of the midpoint of the tribulation. So now we are going to talk about the judgments that are to come upon the earth. So there's a series of ever-worsening judgments that'll be inflicted on the people on the earth, not in heaven where the raptured church is already is. So the Bible, specifically in the book of Revelation, talks about first the 7 seal judgments. And if you go and look at those 7 seal judgments, there's really an emphasis on man being left to his own devices without God's intervention. So when it comes to the other judgments, no, there's much more of they're God's judgments on sin. And if the people are holding on to those sins, they will suffer the judgment. All right? But this first 7 seal judgments really looks like it's man left to his own devices. Then we have the 7 trumpet judgments, often called the judgment of the thirds, because there's a third of the vegetation, a third of the waters that are affected, a third of the heavens that are devastated, that is a third of the sun and the moon don't show their light and such as that. So this is called a judgment of the thirds. So ever increasing judgments, remember that. And then we have the 7 bowl judgments that most people say are near the end of the tribulation. These judgments finish the work started in the trumpet judgments. So whereas the trumpet judgments were a third of the waters were turned bad, this is, no, all of them are bad. Well, when do these judgments occur? That is subject of a lot of discussion and debate and study. Are they sequential? Are they overlapping? Some people would say that the 7 seal judgments are actually age-long and have been happening from during this whole church period and just getting worse as they go. Some people say that the 7 seal judgments have already started. They're maybe not age-long, but they've already started, and that the trumpet judgments will start at the beginning of the tribulation. In reality, we do not know for certain. We can make assumptions, which is what I have done on this timeline here. I've made assumptions. But we don't know for certain when these things happen. It is pretty certain that the 7 bowl judgments are right at the end of the tribulation period. And it's pretty obvious that these judgments are sequential, but are they sequential / overlapping? Okay? Let me go back to that. So why would we say that they may be overlapping? Because each of these ends with huge earthquakes. Is that the same earthquake or is that different earthquakes? That's why some people say it may be overlapping. So next we have 144,000 sealed Jewish missionaries that the book of Revelation talks about. And it wants to make you understand that these are literal 144,000 Jewish preachers, if you will, because it lists that there are 12,000 from each of 12 tribes of Israel, so that you understand that it is not figurative, it is literal. And we know that they're going to preach for 3.5 years. But there's a lot of speculation over which 3.5 year period is it. Is it at the first half of the 7 year tribulation? Is it the second half of the tribulation? We're not sure, but for purposes of this timeline, I've made my assumption. So we have the rise and preaching of this 144,000, which I believe the main part of their ministry is in that first 3.5 years of the 7 year tribulation. But then we look and we see them mentioned later on in the book of Revelation, and now it appears they're actually in heaven. Well, they're sealed so that they can't be killed. So how do they wind up in heaven? Do they all die? It doesn't look like they're killed. It sounds like there's another rapture of these 144,000. Now, does that include people who have been born again through their ministry? I don't know. And then we have the two witnesses, and that is the Bible's term for it. The Bible does not refer to them as missionary, the 144,000 as missionaries, but it does refer to these two as witnesses. So again, there's a 3.5 year ministry that they have. But which 3.5 years? Again, is it the first 3.5 years of the 7? Is it the second 3.5 years of the 7? I've always assumed that the 144,000 was the first half, and these two witnesses were the second half. Am I correct? I'm not sure. So these two witnesses are thought by most people to be either literally Elijah and Moses or Elijah and Enoch. So there's two people in the Bible that were taken directly to heaven. That's Elijah and Enoch. But who showed up at the Mount of Transfiguration talking to Jesus? It was Elijah and Moses. So we'll get into this more later, but it's a lot of debate over these things. Personally, I believe it's Elijah and Moses, and we'll show you reasons why later. You don't have to believe me. So we have, when is the time of their revealing and preaching? Again, my assumption is this is the second 3.5 years of the 7 year tribulation. Then it says that they are killed by the Antichrist, and that their bodies lay in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. And then all the world will see as their bodies are resurrected and raptured. Okay, so how does all the world see this? This is a technology statement in that the whole world will be able to see it because of satellite TV on CNN or whatever news program. So during the midpoint, and this is one that we know specifically the time, at the middle of that 7 year period, there's an event that Jesus described, and he was quoting from the book of Daniel, or pointing back to the book of Daniel. And it's described as the abomination of desolation. Well, what is that? It's when the Antichrist sets up an image that is an idol to be worshipped in the temple in Jerusalem and proclaims himself to be God. And it's sometime around this point where a remnant of the people of Israel finally realize that the Antichrist is not the true Messiah, but he is a false Messiah, and they are forced to run to keep from being destroyed because the Antichrist turns on them to try to annihilate them. And where do they go to? They flee to the area of Petra in Jordan. So you may have seen pictures of Petra. You're familiar with it if you've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It is the front of one of those buildings that you see in that movie. But the Antichrist and his armies will pursue to annihilate Israel in this second 3.5 year period. Now then, going over to the book of Revelation, what else happens during this time period? We have the judgment towards the very end, we assume, towards the very end of the 7-year period. We have the judgment of Mystery Babylon, as the Bible calls it. What is this Mystery Babylon? It's a worldwide religious system that worships the Antichrist, and it's going to be overthrown. So that's in Revelation 17. In Revelation 18, it talks about the judgment of the city of Babylon. And there's debate as to whether this is symbolic of some other city, possibly Rome. A lot of people tie Mystery Babylon to Roman Catholicism and the city of Babylon to Rome itself. Or is it the actual city of Babylon on the Euphrates River that will be rebuilt? Whatever the case, there will be ultimate destruction, not merely taken over. So why do people say that it could be the city of Babylon? Because the city of Babylon was never destroyed. It was taken over, but throughout all these centuries, there have been people still living within that general area. It talks about an ultimate destruction, that people will no longer ever be able to live there. Let me make an assumption. It sounds like nuclear war, nuclear attack on that city. And my personal assumption is that it is the actual city of Babylon, not an attack on Roman Catholicism or Rome. I think that is involved, but not in this judgment here. At some point in here, and I don't know if this is at the mid-tribulation period, is it at the end of it, but at some point in here, spiritual blindness of the Jewish people will be removed. So Jesus proclaimed, and so did the Apostle Paul, that spiritual blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Well, when does that happen? All right? Not totally sure. It is sometime around this time period, most likely. I'm going to keep throwing these kind of words in there because so that you understand that we may make good assumptions, but they're still assumptions until we have it explicitly nailed down. So what we do know is that the remnant of the Jewish people will recognize Jesus as the true Messiah, and they're going to finally pray for his return and his salvation. So right before they're about to be destroyed, they're going to call on Jesus. And then we have the Battle of Armageddon. And actually, that's really a misnomer. Armageddon is like the gathering place of these armies. So there's armies of nations of the world that are going to gather in the Jezreel Valley, which is where Armageddon is, or Harmageddo is the actual name. Okay? And they're going to gather there near a place called Harmageddo as a staging ground for destroying the Jews and for attacking Jerusalem. Then, when they're at their lowest point, when they're about to be destroyed, that is when Jesus comes back. So you can call it the second coming of Jesus, you can call it the second advent of Jesus. He's going to return to the earth, this time not as a little baby, meek and mild, like the first time, but this is as conquering king. He defends and saves the Jewish people from destruction and defeats the Antichrist's armies. The Bible describes when Jesus comes back in this event that the Antichrist armies are actually going to fight against Jesus and his return. And that doesn't make any sense to me, but we're going to talk about that in the next couple of lessons. All right? So when Jesus comes back, he defeats the Antichrist armies. Then the Antichrist and the false prophet will be thrown into the lake of fire. That is forever punishment. They will be there forever. Then the Bible says that Satan will be locked up in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. This is a time that we call the millennium, um, which I think I explain here in a moment. Then we have the judgment of the nations. So what am I talking about? It's normally called the judgment of the sheep and the goats that Jesus described. This is a judgment of the peoples remaining on earth who survived that 7-year tribulation period. And how are they judged? It's going to be based on their treatment of the Jewish people. So if you go and read the story of when Jesus talks about, or the story, the prophecy, when Jesus talks about the judgment of the sheep and goats, you'll find that it's the basis of judgment is the treatment of the Jewish people. So, I said that Satan is going to be locked up for 1,000 years. During this time, it's going to be the time of the millennium reign of Christ on earth. So, what is this millennium word? It's from the Latin words for 1,000 years. Milli meaning 1,000, annum meaning year. All right? So, it's a period of 1,000 years when Jesus will reign on earth without the influence of Satan. This is described in Revelation 20, verse 3. So at the end of that 1,000 years, Satan is going to be released from the bottomless pit for a short time. Why? I'm going to be totally honest with you. I have heard various answers to that, and my answer is I'm not sure. I can take some conjectures, but I don't know. So during this time when he is released, there will be people that listen to him. And there will be some people who revolt against God under a leader, a human leader, that is figuratively referred to as Gog. Remember the battle of Gog and Magog? So there's this same term again. This is now, that previous one was a type. Here's the antitype. But these people who revolt are going to be defeated and thrown into the lake of fire. So then you have the resurrection and judgment of the unrighteous dead. That is, those who were not born again. Those who rejected God. And that judgment is going to be at the Great White Throne Judgment. So you may have heard of the Great White Throne Judgment. All of us are going to be judged somehow. But as believers, we're not judged as to whether or not we get into heaven. That is already settled. We're judged on our works. So it's a judgment of rewards rather. This great white throne judgment, you don't want to be there. And that'll be at the end of the 1,000-year millennium reign. So then we have, and this seems odd, but both heaven and earth are going to be destroyed by fire. Both heaven and earth have been corrupted by sin. So remember, Satan in the book of Job came in front before the throne of God, and God asked him, "Where have you been, Satan?" He says, "I've been going, to and forth through the land on the earth." Satan has corrupted heaven, or maybe not as much as, but as earth is corrupted, heaven has been corrupted too. So God is going to destroy them by fire, but it doesn't stop there. He's going to rebuild and make a new heaven and a new earth. And that's forever. And then we have this thing called the New Jerusalem, which comes down from heaven to earth. That is the forever home of the body and bride of Christ. So again, I show you here's the overall of the things that we just went through. If you want to take a screenshot, you can. You can go back and take a screenshot of every one of these. Feel free. And look at it in more detail later. So let's sum up all the things that we've heard so far, all right? This has been an extremely brief overview of many of the key events and peoples of prophecy. I mean, there's a reason that we're going to go through 8 different lessons, with this will only be, or not lessons, but studies, with this only being the first of those. And each of those studies will be rather long as we dig into the details of all these things. So this is very brief overview. Again, deliberately without the accompanying scripture. I mentioned a few pieces, but because I wanted you to get the flavor of everything before we actually go in to really go in and get the meat and vegetables of all of this. The purpose was to start getting you familiar with the terms and events. So when I mentioned the Antichrist, when I mentioned the tribulation, when I mentioned Gog and Magog, you'll start to put these things together and understand sort of where they fit in, or where it is speculated they might fit in. And you get used to the terms and such as that. And as I've said, the following studies, those other 7, we're going to go into a lot more detail on these events and other events and peoples that are in Bible prophecy. So next time, we're going to go into Islamic eschatology. And that seems weird in a Bible prophecy set of lessons. Why would you ever touch Islamic eschatology, Islamic end times teaching? Because we're going to find out that the two fit together sort of not as a hand and glove, but more as a left hand and a right hand. Sort of they fit together and they're opposites. How about that? The good guys become bad guys, the bad guys become good guys. So I hope that you are curious enough to come with us and find out about that. And then following that, we're going to talk about an untraditional speculation of what we talked about today. So I encourage you to come along with us as we go through these last couple of lessons in this study. And with that, I hope to see you next time here on Passing the Torch. So long.